Kyra Jackson was the new kid at West Hills High, a predominantly white school in a small suburban town. Standing at 4 feet 7 inches, with her curly hair pulled into a neat bun, Kyra was used to being the outsider. Her father, an influential businessman, had been transferred to the town to oversee a major project. Despite her position, Kyra knew she would face challenges fitting in here, just like at her last school. From the first day, Kyra could feel the stares. The whispered comments followed her through the hallways, but she kept her head high. She had dealt with this kind of racism before, and her mother had always told her to focus on her studies and her dreams. But there was something different about West Hills. The racism wasn't just in the whispers. It lived in the actions of her classmates. The first few weeks passed relatively quietly. Kyra sat alone at lunch, buried herself in her books, and tried to keep a low profile. But as much as she tried to stay out of the spotlight, she couldn't avoid Daniel Thompson, the school's golden boy. Daniel, a tall, athletic senior with sandy blonde hair and a perfect smile, was adored by teachers and students alike. But beneath his charming exterior lay a dark side. He had a reputation for picking on anyone who didn't fit his mold of perfection, and Kyra was an obvious target. It started with the small things. Daniel would accidentally bump into her in the hallways, sending her books flying. He'd make snide comments under his breath when she passed by, calling her names like Jungle Girl or Slave. At first, Kyra tried to ignore him, just as she'd done with bullies in the past. But Daniel's bullying escalated, and soon his friends joined in. One afternoon, Kyra stayed late after school to finish a project in the library. The school hallways were quiet, and the sky outside had turned a deep purple as dusk set in. She packed her bag and headed toward the exit when she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Daniel and 3 of his friends following her, their eyes gleaming with malice. "Hey, Jackson," Daniel called, his voice dripping with mockery. "Where you headed? Back to the jungle?" Kyra clenched her fists and kept walking, but they were faster. Before she could reach the door, Daniel stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His friends circled around, their faces twisted in cruel amusement. "I'm talking to you," Daniel said, shoving her shoulder. "You think you're better than us, don't you?" Kyra's heart raced. She could feel the anger boiling inside her, but she knew better than to react. Her mother's words echoed in her head. "Don't let them get to you. You're stronger than this." But Daniel wasn't done. He leaned in closer, his breath hot against her face. "What's a girl like you doing in a place like this? You don't belong here, Jackson. People like you should know their place." Kyra's blood ran cold. People like you. She had heard that phrase too many times in her life, and each time it cut her deeper than the last. But before she could say anything, Daniel grabbed her by the collar of her jacket and slammed her against the lockers. "Say something, you dumb," he started, but Kyra interrupted him. "Let me go," she said, her voice low but firm. "You don't know who you're messing with." Her words seemed to amuse Daniel. He laughed, and his friends followed suit. "Oh, really? And who are you? Some little nobody who got into this school by mistake." Just then, the school's principal, Mr. Harrison, appeared at the end of the hallway. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the empty halls. Daniel released Kyra and stepped back, his expression turning innocent. "Nothing, sir," he said smoothly. "We were just talking." Kyra shot him a look of pure disgust, but she stayed silent. She knew how this worked. Daniel was untouchable. Kids like him never face consequences. Mr. Harrison eyed the group suspiciously but said nothing more. "You all should head home," he said. "Now." Kyra gathered her things and walked past them, but as she reached the door, Daniel whispered in her ear, "This isn't over." That night, Kyra couldn't shake the encounter from her mind. She was tired. Tired of being the target, tired of the racism, tired of having to be the bigger person. Her father, Marcus Jackson, noticed something was wrong during dinner. "You're quiet tonight," he said, setting down his fork. "Everything okay at school?" Kyra hesitated. She had never wanted to burden her father with her problems, especially since he was always so busy with work. But she couldn't hold it in anymore. She told him everything, about Daniel, the bullying, the names, and what had happened after school. Her father's face darkened as he listened, his jaw clenched. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. I didn't want to cause trouble, Kyra said, looking down at her plate. This isn't trouble, Kyra. This is unacceptable. No one treats my daughter like that. The next morning, Marcus Jackson walked into West Hills High, his presence commanding attention. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a sharp suit that spoke of authority. He marched straight to the principal's office, his face set in a determined scowl. Kyra, who had been sitting in the front office, waiting for her father to finish a meeting with Mr. Harrison, watched as her father strode in. The office secretary looked up, her eyes widening as she realized who he was. Mr. Jackson, where's the principal? Marcus demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. Mr. Harrison, who had been listening in from his office door, stepped out, his face turning pale as he recognized the man standing before him. Mr. Jackson, I didn't expect, the principal stammered, clearly nervous. You didn't expect what? Marcus asked, his voice cutting like a knife. Didn't expect that the black girl you've been allowing to be bullied has a father who's not afraid to speak up? Or didn't you expect me to walk in and hold you accountable for letting this go on? Mr. Harrison swallowed hard. I assure you, Mr. Jackson, we're taking this matter very seriously. Not seriously enough, Marcus interrupted, stepping closer to the principal, his eyes flashing with anger. Because if you were, my daughter wouldn't be walking home afraid of some racist punk and his cronies. I want this stopped now, or you'll be hearing from my lawyers. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and for the first time, Mr. Harrison realized he wasn't just dealing with a student. He was facing a powerful man with resources, and he had made a grave mistake in underestimating him. The tension in Mr. Harrison's office was thick, with Marcus Jackson's words echoing through the small space. The principal stood frozen, unsure of how to navigate the situation. He had seen angry parents before, but none like Marcus. This was a man who meant every word, and it was clear that inaction wasn't an option. I'll take care of it immediately, Mr. Harrison finally managed to say, his voice shaky. I assure you, Daniel and his friends will face disciplinary action. Marcus didn't break eye contact. I expect to see real consequences, not just a slap on the wrist. The principal nodded quickly, his face pale. Marcus turned and walked out, his presence still lingering in the air as he left the office. Kyra sat in the waiting area, eyes wide, having overheard the entire exchange. Dad, she started as he approached her, but he held up a hand. Let's go, Kyra. This isn't over yet. As they walked out of the school together, Kyra felt a mixture of pride and fear swirling inside her. She had never seen her father like this, so intense, so fierce. She knew he loved her, but this was different. This was a father going to war for his daughter. It was overwhelming, yet it filled her with a deep sense of safety that she hadn't felt in a long time. But as much as her father's intervention gave her a sense of hope, Kyra couldn't help but worry about the consequences. Daniel wasn't going to take this lying down. Word spread quickly through the school. By lunch, everyone knew about the confrontation between Daniel, Kyra, and Mr. Jackson. Some students whispered about it in admiration, impressed that someone had finally stood up to Daniel. Others, especially Daniel's clique, simmered in silent rage. Daniel was furious. His face burned with embarrassment every time someone mentioned Kyra's father storming into the school. He had always been untouchable, until now. That black girl's family thinks they can just waltz in here and push us around, Daniel spat as he sat with his friends during lunch, his fists clenched, knuckles white. They don't know who they're messing with. What are you going to do, man? One of his friends asked. Daniel leaned forward, a sinister grin spreading across his face. I'll show them. I'll show them all. Later that day, Daniel cornered Kyra in the locker room after gym class. There were no teachers around, no witnesses, just Daniel, his two goons, and Kyra. I told you this wasn't over, Daniel sneered, his face inches from hers. Your daddy might think he can scare me, but this is my school. You don't belong here, and I'm going to make sure you know that. Kyra's heart raced, but she stood her ground, refusing to show fear. She had dealt with bullies like Daniel before, but something about the coldness in his eyes made her uneasy. What are you going to do, Daniel? She asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her insides. Call me more names? Push me around some more? You're nothing but a coward. Her words hit a nerve, and Daniel's expression darkened. He stepped closer, but before he could do anything, a voice boomed from behind them. Get away from her! Kyra turned to see Mr. Williams, the gym teacher, standing in the doorway, his face set in a hard scowl. Daniel's bravado crumbled instantly. Is there a problem here? Mr. Williams asked, his eyes locked on Daniel. No, sir, Daniel muttered, backing away. His friends followed him out of the locker room without another word. Kyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Mr. Williams gave her a nod of reassurance. You okay? Kyra nodded, grateful for the intervention. But even as she walked out of the locker room, she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel wasn't done. He was planning something bigger. That evening, Marcus Jackson received a call from Mr. Harrison, who nervously explained that Daniel had been suspended for his actions. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with a simple suspension. This boy has terrorized my daughter, Marcus said firmly. I'm not going to sit by and let him get away with this. A few days suspension isn't enough. I want a full investigation into his behavior and into this school's handling of racial harassment. Mr. Harrison stammered, promising to follow up, but Marcus wasn't waiting around. He had already contacted a civil rights lawyer earlier that day. By the next morning, the school was buzzing with the news that Marcus Jackson had filed a formal complaint against West Hills High, accusing the administration of failing to protect Kyra from racial harassment. The media quickly caught wind of the story, and soon reporters were camped outside the school, questioning students, teachers, and parents about the allegations. Daniel's parents, both prominent figures in the town, were livid. They had always believed their son was untouchable, but now their reputation was at stake. They tried to sweep the situation under the rug, claiming that Kyra was overreacting. But Marcus wouldn't back down. He knew this wasn't just about his daughter. This was about every black student who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. As the investigation into Daniel's behavior unfolded, shocking truths came to light. Several other students came forward, revealing that Daniel and his friends had been harassing them for months, targeting anyone they saw as different. The stories varied, but one thing remained constant. Daniel's racism was no secret to anyone, except the administration who had turned a blind eye for far too long. The pressure mounted on Mr. Harrison and the school board to take action. Parents protested outside the school, demanding accountability. The story had grown far beyond the confines of the small town, with national news outlets picking up the case. Daniel's suspension turned into an expulsion, and his family's attempts to defend him only made matters worse. His parents' wealth and influence couldn't protect him anymore. The more they tried to silence the accusations, the louder they grew. And through it all, Kyra remained strong. Her father had shown her that standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity, was worth the fight. She had faced Daniel's hatred, but she had also seen the power of courage and solidarity. The school had been forced to confront its own failures, and change was on the horizon. Months later, West Hills High was a different place. The school had implemented new policies to combat racism and bullying, and a new principal had taken Mr. Harrison's place. The walls that had once felt cold and hostile to Kyra were now filled with the voices of students who felt safer, who knew that they were protected. Kyra walked through the hallways with her head held high, no longer afraid of the stares or whispers. She wasn't just the new girl anymore. She was the girl who had fought back, who had stood up against racism and won. And as for Daniel, he was long gone, his expulsion marking the end of his reign of terror. His name was rarely spoken anymore, except as a cautionary tale of what happens when hatred and privilege go unchecked. Kyra knew that the fight against racism wasn't over. It never would be. But she had learned something important. She had a voice, and it was powerful. And with her father by her side, she was ready to use it, no matter what challenges lay ahead.